Hello everyone, I'm Cchavi Vashisht. I am an educator at Unacademy platform and I've been teaching sociology for more than 2 years now. Uh, Today this is the discussion on framework for previous year questions. I have already taken a lecture on your answer writing and framework for previous year questions in the month of July. This is the second part of the series where I'll be discussing with you four other types of framework, and then there'll be another third part to it. In this class, the attempt is not to teach you a particular topic, but to tell you that what kind of a question can you expect and what have been the previous year's pattern and how can you write those questions in a better format. Because often the problem that students face is that whether in a given question you have to add something or subtract something. Writing the apt answer requires you to have a knowledge of how and what to write till what extent. If you can remember that this is Harold Laswell's statement, who said what to whom, with what effect, to what extent. So in your mains examination, how well you write your answers, how well you frame your answers is going to get you the desired marks. And here I always aim that every student of sociology should aim, or not just sociology, for any other student who's attempting to write the mains examination in your optional. If you really want to get selected, you want to achieve and reach the interview level, you have to get a 300 plus. That is sometimes considered as imperative. You may often find examples, few examples, where you score less but still you get it, then you get a good marks in your mains. Well, this is a permutation combination game thing, but always target at your optional, because this is something where you can show your stronghold, where you can write better answers and prove your point, right? You just have to, you're not expected to have a PhD level or a master's degree level knowledge here. What you're expected to have here is a conceptual clarity of the subject, and that is what our aim and purpose for the subject is, right? So let us start with the first set of questions, that is on research-oriented questions. Well, research-oriented questions is something which is inevitable in every paper, in every year. You get at least one, and if you're lucky, you get at least 2 or 3 questions. Why I say lucky? Because these are straightforward questions. You don't have to manipulate them. You don't have to, add a extra level of conceptual clarity. These are something very fixed questions where you can just learn, have a conceptual clarity, learn the answer, and you can write any sort of answer. And this is a very 2-3 days topic. Once you have your notes, all you need to do is revise, right? And you don't have to do a daily addition to it. So one of the topics which I feel is very scoring, which if you know how to write a better answer, you can really score good. Right. Today we are going to discuss a question related to methods. All right. Often you get a question about quantitative, qualitative methods. This is something I have already discussed with you in the previous lecture, where I have compared the two methods. In today's discussion, we will look at any one particular method. I have chosen the social survey method. But why methods are important? See, if this comes as a part of 20 marker, then you need to give a little bit brief about first. If you take the example of social survey, you would define social survey and then you would tell why this method is important, right? Similarly, for any method, you need to understand that methods are important because they set a standard or a procedure for you. It defines your procedures, right? And it clearly makes your knowledge different from the layman knowledge. That is how you acquire your knowledge in sociology or any other subject, through methods. That's why methods are important, because that helps you identify what are the regularities, what is the human behavior pattern, and how your knowledge can be very systematic to understand the different phenomena or different patterns of the society. Well, whichever technique you choose in your research, your method technique is guided by the theoretical stand. What is the approach? What is the theoretical stand that a researcher is taking? What is the kind of data that you are determined to achieve? For example, you would use, if you have to find the data on number of family number of joint families in Delhi or in any other part of the country, you would go with the social survey method. But once you want to know the status of women, this is often the example which you find in your NCRT also, and this is the example which you often use also. If you want to know the status of women, you would obviously choose a sample where you would choose a method where you would get a more clearer picture on the status of women. You would like to interact more on the field, so you would choose a method where you are participating in the field work. For example, a participant observation, a field survey, an ethnographic survey. So that ways you will have the theoretical stand, what you're trying to achieve, what kind of data you want to achieve. That would determine what method you choose, right? And of course, the element of finances and all is very important. We will come to that part again, but let us see the first question, that is, analyze the strength and weaknesses of a social survey method. Now you must realize that this is a 10-marker question. A 10-marker question needs you to focus not on any other thing, but what is the direct question asked to you, strengths and weaknesses. But here it does not mean that you directly start with strengths of social survey method, weaknesses of social survey method. It is very essential. Every method has a certain standard definition. I would strictly advise all of you that please learn the definitions. Definitions are something that would give a weightage, extra weightage to your answer. Definitely your marks would increase. Social survey method or any other method has a particular definition to it. For example, when you write anything about ethnographic study or participant observation, the word that you need to include is a way of life. You try to understand the way of life, right? So every method that you study has a certain keyword attached to it. And when you write your answer, this should be reflected in your first paragraph. That is, you would start the answer by defining the method. So what is a social survey method? It is a research design which involves the collection of standardized data. Now sometimes, often I check the copy and it is written that it is there to collect large amount of data. That is not the correct terminology. Terminology, vocabulary plays a very important role. I'm not here suggesting that you must learn very hi-fi, difficult English words to prove your point. Here, terminology and vocabulary means that every subject has a specific terms attached to itself, specific vocabulary attached to itself. So similarly, when you're defining something, there are certain words that you need to use. Social survey method. That is, you're collecting large amount of data, but a standardized data. So that thing should be highlighted in the definition itself. Then, if you know that who is the father of the particular method, you can include the name. If you don't know, that is completely optional. You can skip that. You need to realize that the importance of social survey method lies in the fact that as it is used in the government offices also. NSSO, for example, compiles every 5 years your data and only surveys around 6 lakh population. Now this, if you see, out of the total population is only 0.06%, right? But yet it is considered authentic because all scientific principles of sampling are used to select your representatives. So one, it is collection of the standardized data, and then how you are collecting your data. So on the basis of the subject of study, it can either be descriptive or analytic, or on the basis of the sampling technique, it can be simple, random, or stratified cluster. Now this is again something optional. If you want to skip it, you don't know it, it is okay, you don't write. But the introduction should be that you define the method and then you tell that who introduced, and you can give one example that where it is conducted. Right. There. Now straight away the question says strengths and weaknesses. I would strictly advise you to use the same term which is used in the question paper. So you will start with saying that the following are the strengths of a social survey method. Now again, in many cases what students do is you write strengths and you make a box, or strengths of social survey method and you make a box. See, this is a paper of sociology. In GS, we can often use this strategy and it's good to go. But when you are writing an optional subject which is social sciences or humanities related, it is always advisable to give a transitionary line. And this line is just serving your purpose. And if you want to highlight it, you can just highlight by underlining the strengths of using social survey method, right? What is the first one? The information is collected over a large set of population. It is not something where you just need to deal with a smaller population in comparison to participant observation, where you need to deal with a smaller sample size. Here, the social survey method, you can have a larger set of population. Second, it attempts to provide an overview. Now, since you're dealing with a larger set of population, you can have an overview of what the situation actually is. But here again, you must keep in mind that it is very objective type of study that you're getting, very superficial knowledge that you're getting. So that will come as a criticism also. So it helps you with the overview of these things and allows generalization. I'm sorry. Just give me 1 minute. And it allows you to have a generalization over a larger set of the population that you're studying. And it also provides you aggregate picture. For example, if you want to analyze the percentage or the ratio of sex ratio in the country, you would use this method, right? But if you want to study the problems, that why we have an adverse sex ratio in a particular region, for example, Punjab or Haryana, for that you need to go into certain more detail, and there participant observation or fieldwork would be more appropriate. Then, since you're collecting standardized data, social survey method helps you to allow, and it allows you to make comparisons. It helps you perform a comparative study. Then it is a manageable investment of time, effort, money. You can study a larger set of a population over a very small span period of time. Otherwise, in the participant observation, what you often do is you have to study a population, a smaller set of population over 3 to 4 months, and then you can give your study. But here, it is a manageable investment of your time, effort, and money, right? So these are your strengths. But what are the weaknesses? Again, as I told you, use the transitioning line and use the word or the question, the word which is mentioned in the question paper itself. Often the question is strengths and weaknesses, and students write advantages or disadvantages because that is how you have written your notes. I would strictly suggest that use the keywords of the question paper, of the questions themselves, so that you are able to write a better answer. Then, only surface level information. I just told you that it provides you a very superficial information. There is no in-depth information. For example, only the number of joint families or the sex ratio. Only these things can be analyzed, not into a greater detail. Then, there can be an error also. For example, the larger set of the population that you're studying, there can be a possibility that you have not chosen the correct sample. You have underrepresented or overrepresented a particular population, or you have neglected completely the other population. Then there can be non-sampling error also that you completely ignore. That is part of that. And then there are shortcomings in its implementation, in the sense that you don't need to have expertise in it. The researcher frames the questions. He or she can either hand it out to the other person and write the answer. Often there can be a misinterpretation of the question. All these things are the shortcomings in its implementation. Now, don't leave the question open-ended for the examiner to analyze the strengths and weaknesses and see that whether the method is relevant or not. Conclusion of any method, especially when the question is of strengths, weaknesses, advantages, disadvantages, relevance, you should conclude by saying that despite above criticism, despite above weaknesses, the method is useful. It is relevant. It is something which is being used by the respondent. So any success of this method lies in the interactions between the investigator and respondents, and especially goodwill and cooperation. The way forward, how you can further enhance the validity or reliability of the particular method. And it is best suited for the quantitative and positivist research. Again, you're highlighting the relevance. That this method, despite its criticism, is relevant and it continues to solve a certain purpose for the other researchers. So you should have a very balanced, I wouldn't always say a positive, but a balanced approach to conclude your answer. And this balanced approach means that you should look at the way forward, but again, you don't have to ride the term way forward as you do in your GS exams, or you can talk about its relevance or anything else which you feel is important. Any thinker related to it, any study related to it, you can highlight that as a option, right? As a conclusion part. So don't leave it open ended. Always conclude, even if it is a 10 marker. An introduction or a conclusion is the basic part of the answer. So don't neglect that part. It is really going to make a difference to what you write and how much you score if you're writing a good conclusion and an introduction. And the best source for it is always your NCRTs, because they are providing the base. This is something I tell all the students. It is a compulsory read, a read which you must often do every 2 months or 1 month. Once you have made your notes, then it is like a half-day job that you finish your 4 NCRTs in a half day. And you will see the amount of change it brings in your answer. Your introductions would be more balanced, your conclusions would be more balanced. Your introduction would always be relevant because you'll start with a definition or something which is written in the NCRT. So it is lucid, it is clearly understandable, there's a conceptual clarity, so you don't have to hunt around. In GS, often what we do is we start with the current-based thing or any report to support your argument. But in sociology, in an optional subject, you have to be very careful with how you start the answer. Right, so this was about the research method. There's another topic that I would deal with you is factors affecting the choice of topic in a social research. Now, no need to be worried about the names that you see here. You can choose either this or this. I would suggest choose this, it's a smaller one, and then you can say the following are the factors affecting the topic of the social research. I've included Bernard's concept or the suggestions only to give you a point of view that any of the thinker that you choose, it's not necessary for you to learn all the thinkers. Choose 1 or 2 thinkers and it is sufficient. Especially when you know that something comes in a 10 marker only and not as a 20 marker. For 20 marker, you must focus on having 4 to 5 thinkers in your answer. And for 10 marker, 1 or 2 thinkers is more than sufficient. Basically, what they're attempting to see in your answers is whether you have a sociological perspective, whether you have sociological understanding, and then you can substantiate it by a thinker. Right? So either you can use this thinker or you can use this. It's completely your choice. Or if you don't want either of the two, you can just start with the understanding that the social research is done with the objective to understand sociological phenomena or societal phenomena through a systematic understanding. That would also be sufficient, right? So you don't have to be worried about learning anything in particular. Conceptual clarity, again, is something that we are seeking in your answer copies. The examiner is seeking in your answer copies. And if you're able to do that, it's more than sufficient, right? So these are only to substantiate. I'm not completely denying the fact that substantiation is not important. Substantiation is the key, because otherwise every other knowledge sounds like a layman knowledge. But if you have something to support it, like any study, any thinker, any theory, or any anything happening in the current events, you just substantiate your point, and your point becomes more valuable and more it has more weightage, right? So in their book, A Methodology for Social Research, they have mentioned that factions, fads, foibles may affect the choice of the topic for the many researchers. Bernard, on the other hand, suggested that every researcher need to ask certain questions. For example, does the subject of your research really interest you? Is it possible to carry out a scientific inquiry? Do you have enough resources? This is something very important. Are you likely to face any ethical or moral problems, or by using any certain method or technique? Or is your subject of research theoretically significant and interesting? It is very important for you to reflect as a researcher. If you're not even pursuing your UPSC journey, if you're pursuing for academics also, you need to ask all these questions when you're deciding the choice of topic for your research. For sociology, you can use these 8 points. These 8 points are written in your Sorito's book, Soritore Saranto's book. That is the book you get often recommended for social research. Only the first 10 pages are sufficient, and if you have been a student of my comprehensive course, which is along with Praveen Kishore sir at Unacademy, then I do cover this topic very nicely, very in a very lucid manner, from both the things, your IGNU also and your social research book also, right? But in case you are listening it here for the first time, then these are the 8 points that you need to mention. Again, you just don't need to mention them as words in itself. You have to give at least 1 or 2 lines to explain them. What do you mean by them, right? And it would be excellent if you have a theory or a study to substantiate, right? Financial constraints, again, whether you have enough resources with you or not, whether you have resources, financial resources with you or not. For example, if you choose to do a study in USA, but you don't have the money to go to USA, so that's not relevant. You should have your substantial funding for this. UGC also provides funding. There are other ways also that you get your funding, but you have to consider your financial constraints also. Time. What are you studying? How much is your budget? For example, for a paper, you would study for 1 or 2 months and you would give out your study. But something which you're writing as your PhD thesis, you give a more time period of time. So what is the time constraint that you have? Availability of assistant experts. Are you doing it single-handedly, or you have multiple experts or assistants with you? What is the research paradigm? Which aspect are you trying to study? Whether you're studying it from the positivist or from the non-positivist perspective. What is the ideology? Again, ontology. What are you aiming to study, right? Expertise. Again, whether you have expertise with you or not, whether you have developed your expertise or not, whether you are a graduate and you're doing a research, or whether you are a PhD scholar and then you're just doing a research. Your expertise is very important, whether you're already employed and then you're doing the research. Then access to research subject. For example, if somebody chooses a subject of, for example, Pakistan, an Indian student or any other students chooses a study of Pakistan, but you're not able to go there. So basically, you're not accessing the research subject, and you're doing your, armchair approach, that you're just reading whatever the material is available, and you bring out a research. Right? It is very important to have access to your research subject. Interaction, a basic interaction with the research subject would give you a much better understanding and increase the validity of your research. Right? And the need for data. Whether you want quantified subjective data, quantified objective data, or you want a subjective data. So whether, depending upon what kind of data you are looking for, you will determine your choice of topic. Then again, you would conclude that apart from the above factors, there are many other factors which are subjective to the individual researcher, and therefore the choice of topic of research is something very individual choice of the researcher, and along with the other constraints that they are there, right? So this was about 2 topics that I had chosen for research methodology. In the next part that would be upcoming in the month of December, I have chosen 2 more topics which are related to research. One is the comparison of sociology with other sciences, and there's one more topic of which is research oriented, right? Now, sometimes there are questions based on classificatory types or types and forms question. If you can recollect, or if you have seen the earlier series, you know that I have already discussed a question framework with you where you're comparing. You are analyzing the differences, or you're comparing. And there I suggested you to use a tabular format. Right? Here the question is on types and forms of family. I'm taking this as an example. Either a classificatory or a types and form. I would also discuss with you the types and forms of, not types and forms, but the geographical distribution of tribes. So there again, we would discuss how to start your answer in terms of that. So whenever you have a question related to types and forms of family, often the mistake students do is that you directly start with, classifying the family. Nuclear-based, joint family, patriarchal family, matrilineal family, matriarchal family. That is not the way to write a perfect answer. You have to always understand that, again, hit the key point. What is being asked to you? The question is on family, and they're asking you the types and forms. So you would start with the definition of the term family. What is family? Family is a social group characterized by common residence, economic cooperation, reproduction. Either you can use Murdoch's definition, which again includes adults of both sexes, at least 2 of whom maintain socially approved sexual relation, and 1 or 2 children owned or adopted of the sexually cohabiting adults. If you can learn this definition, well and good, helps you in writing every question that comes on family. Again, family is a very important topic. Every year, inevitably, you get 2 or 3 questions related to family chapter, right? Family, marriage, and kinship. Or you can simply use the Oxford Dictionary definition that defines family as a group consisting of 1 or 2 parents and their children. Again, this definition is more comprehensive vis-a-vis Murdoch's definition. Murdoch's definition, despite the criticism, despite its shortcoming, is the most conventional definition. But again, there are other forms of family that are also emerging. Here you don't have to write that, but I'll tell you where to include that part. Right? This definition includes step family, single parent, and doesn't even mention the sex or orientation, so it also includes same-sex families. Now, when you're talking about the types and forms of family, never write in the framework that nuclear, joint, matrilineal. आप एक framework choose कर लो, एक theme choose कर लो. For example, choice of mates. If you don't know this, it is not something which is compulsory. You can skip it, but it adds value to your answer. So choice of mates, you will start with N.H. Morgan's classification. Again, this is something that we cover in the comprehensive course. N.H. Morgan classification, basically he gives a historical description of family, how family evolved from being consanguine family, which is a large extended group and there's no restrictions on your size of family or your sexually cohabiting partners, to the present form that is monogamy. So he traces this evolution of family and gave a historical description of family. Then orientation and procreation. Orientation is the family where you're born, your blood relations, and procreation is where you are married. That is your affinal relations. Right? Then choose the theme authority. Authority mein your command-based family, which can either be patriarchal families. Now have a distinction between patrilineal and patriarchal. Patriarchal family means that the command of the senior most male member goes on. Lineage ka matlab hai how your relations, whether you're carrying the lineage from your father's line or mother's line. In India, now this would be a very interesting, this is a separate debate, but in India, we have matrilineal families. We don't have matriarchal families, right? Because the authority of the male continues, right? Then command-based, patriarchal, matriarchal. And this is something that you can again read in S.C. Dubey book, a very excellent description of some of the basic contents of, or basic structures of the Indian society. You have topics on urban and rural life, you have topics on family, marriage, kinship, unity and diversity. It would help you in writing paper 1 answers also. It's a very thin book, approximately 200 pages. A very thin book, a very important book, not even 200, I think it is just 100 pages. I often keep it with me on the table whenever I'm teaching because it is so essential and it gives you a very basic clarity, right? So for your GS paper 1 also, where you have to write answers on sociology based topics or societal based topic, you can use this as your part. Then democratic society is what you find in Western countries. There's equal consultation, and somehow this phenomenon is also emerging in India. Then residence based. Either it's patri-local, that is you're staying with your parental side, father's side, or it is matri-local. Please be careful of the words. It is patri-local or matri-local. Matri again, it is patri. Right? Descent. Now, descent can be either matrilineal. Oops. Sorry. Descent can be either matrilineal, patrilineal, or it can be bilateral. That few things you trace from the father's line and few from the mother's line, right? And then depth of generations. इसमें आपका nuclear and extended आता है. According to the Western perspective, extended आता है. In the Indian perspective, it is joint, right? Now, this is the classification that you will use in the paper 1 answer. For paper 2, you need to make a slight difference to it. For example, you would not talk about choice of mates, but you would focus on the depth of generations and talk about joint family. And you would also give a definition of joint family. Either you can choose Iravati Karve, that's the most conventional definition, and then you give the other forms. For example, descent, you can talk about patrilineal, matrilineal, cognatic. You can talk about residence. In residence, you have another new form that has emerged, that is neolocal. So you can talk about patrilocal, matrilocal, and neolocal. Membership or depth of generation, I've already told you, and the number of mates. For example, you have monogamy or polygamy marriages. Because in India, you have prevalence of polygamous marriages. So there, a slight orientation would change in terms of types and forms of family. Now, this is part of paper 2. So there, it would be a little bit of change where you need to add 1, the monogamy and the exogamy part, monogamy and the polygamy part, the number of mates actually. If you want, I'll write it here, number of mates. And within this, you will write monogamous or polygamous marriages, because in India, we have prevalence of that. Right? Both amongst Hindu and Muslims. Again, this is something which is mentioned in your S.E. Dubey book also. And you have polyandrous marriages also, right, amongst the tribes. So that would come as an additional point as part of your paper 2 examination, right? And in the depth of generations, you would also talk about nuclear and joint family, because in the Indian context, we use the term joint family and not extended family. So joint family, you would define the term joint family and then write the answer. But how would you conclude this? You need to understand that despite the different types and forms of family, it is a universal institution. It is a universal institution which has continued to prevail since historical times. And in the present times, because of the changes of urbanization, industrialization, globalization, new forms and types of family have emerged. Now, this would not something come as part of your types and forms of family, but you would write this in the concluding paragraph, that there are new types and forms or emerging forms of family. That is, for example, female-headed households, single-parent families, homosexual families, reconstituted families, and then you would conclude your answer that it remains to be a universal institution, right? So this is how you will write a question on types and forms of family. Now, next classification that we will do is of tribes. We will cover racial and geographical, but there are others also, for example, economic and language, right? This is a topic that you cover from Nadeem Hasnain. Again, this is something I take very comprehensively in the course. But if you want to know the book, it is Nadeem Hasnain book. The first initial 100 pages are more than sufficient, and you don't have to go into the details of it. For example, when the book is describing about the problems of tribe, it does focus a lot on problem of alcoholism, drug abuse. That is something you don't have to go into the details of it. But it's an excellent book to give you a very good perspective on tribes population in India, classification, problems, and everything, right? So if there's a question on classification of tribes, often you get the question of geographical distribution of tribes. What students do or commit the mistake here is they'll just make a map of India. Again, I don't support of making a map until and unless you have a very good diagram with you. Sorry for that vague diagram. But if you know how to make a map, okay, fine, you can include a map. But the question is about the geographical classification, right? Again, the first thing is you will define. There's another topic that often comes in the examination, that was this is a definitional problem of types. And that is also a very interesting debate when you do the tribes chapter, right? So first you will define tribes. Either you can use Oxford Dictionary, or you can you choose D.N. Majumdar's definition. You can choose Mendelbaum's definition. You can choose Andre Bethes' definition. But first thing is that you need to define what is tribes, right? Then you go on, telling the geographical distribution. Again, geographical distribution, there are multiplicity of factors involved in it. Like you will choose B.S. Guha's classification, and you will talk about the 3 zones in which B.S. Guha has classified or geographically classified the tribes. The first one is the north and the eastern. The second one is the central and middle. And third one is the southern. Now, rather than writing one tribes in each of the state or each of the region, you have to first tell what is the area that they are covering. What are the different tribes? What do they practice? right? That is how your answer becomes comprehensive. सिर्फ नाम लिखने देने से वो geographical classification नहीं बनता, right? So you have to properly tell a little bit more detail about them. So first, B.S. Guha's classification, 3 types. North and northeastern, it covers the areas of sub-Himalayan and mountainous valleys of eastern frontier. Central and middle, it covers the area of Indo-Gangetic, and southern, south of Krishna River. Then you give examples of each: Dafla Miri, Abor, Jaunsiri, whatever. Then Savara, Bhilj, Santhal, Juang, Chenchu, Kurumba, Toda. Large area of population density is less, and they practice jhum and terrace cultivation. Here, they have a cultural contact with the neighboring one because central region is a zone of convergence, right? So they practice both shifting and plough cultivation. Again, this is the region which often suffers from the problem of considering tribes as present. And this is the problem that we often face when you're doing economic integration of tribes. And tribes are considered as peasant. This is a very, again, interesting debate where Sujit Sinha equates them along a continuum. On the one side it is tribes and the other side it is peasants, and how tribes are considered along the continuum of the peasants. Right. Southern, there is influence of seas and therefore hunting and fishing. Now this is the geographical classification given by B.S. Guha. But do you see any problem in this classification? This classification does not include Andamans and Nicobar. And that is the 4th zone that you need to write as a concluding part. That the 4th zone is this, which is not being considered, and they are ethnically more close to the South Indian tribes. Right? This is how you would conclude your answer, that this is the geographical classification of tribes, and tribes are prevalent across the country. Now there is another classification that is a linguistic classification, but we are not considering that here. You can study it on your own. D.N. Majumdar has given classified tribes on the basis of language in 3 families. The first one is Dravidian, second one is Austric, and third one is Tibeto-Chinese. Racial distinction. Again, this is something very difficult task, but again, Guha has given a racial classification. He considered 3 racial classification, but Mediterranean, Western Parchis and Nordic is something which is not widely prevalent in India. So we will only study the 3 which are most predominantly available in India. The first one is the Proto-Australoids. This group is characterized by the dark skin color, sunken nose, lower forehead. Problem is that when you are writing your answer, you just write Proto-Australoid and you give the example. But thoda sa aap usko explain karo. What does it mean? That would really enhance your answer. You're talking about racial classification. Just give 1 or 2 examples of the physical features. That makes your answer more comprehensive. Right? Mongoloids. You can talk about the light skin color, the head and face being broad, the nose bridge being very low, their eyes are slanting, anything. Just a 1 physical feature also would really make the difference. And then you can talk about the different tribes, that is Bhotia, Manchu, Naga, Khasi, and then talk about the Negreto. Their dark skin color tending to look like blue, round head, broad nose, frizzle hair. Kadar, Onge, Jarava, etc. And then you conclude. You can conclude by saying that you cannot put the racial classification of tribes into a strict category. And D.N. Majumdar has said that India is a melting pot of races. India is a melting pot of races. You can conclude by D.N. Majumdar's statement that you cannot put them in the strict category, but you can classify tribes broadly on these aspects. Now, sometimes there are questions on GS based. I often tell you in sociology, it is very important that you read your NCERT and you would understand what is a sociological perspective. Your sociological perspective involves what are the social structures. And this is something I know I say it in my every class because you learn this. This is not something I have created or anybody else has created. This is mentioned in your NCERT. Class 11th. It is, consider this book as a Bible, right? So class 11th NCERT, you read it, social structures, social processes, social institutions, and social groups. If you find any question which is GS type, analyze on these 4 points. कोई भी एक point ले लो and analyze it. For example, if you're considering social consequences of urbanization, you would consider what are the social processes involved here, how there is lack of integration or lack of solidarity, and that is a social consequence of urbanization. You will again, this is something imperative, you start with the definition. Definition is that it includes both demographic and social dimensions. Demographic trends reveal that although the proportion of urban population in India is less, yet in absolute terms it is increasing, right? It is more than the total population of several developed countries. In sociology, the term urbanization is also used to denote a distinct way of life which emerges in the cities due to its large, dense, heterogeneous population, right? So you just give a basic introduction. Now, what is the social consequences? There are 3 social consequences of urbanization. See, this is something picked up from the IGNOU. In case you want, you can add more content to it. But since it is a standardized book which is used for your master's and graduation level, I prefer, taking this as a base book, right? So 3 social consequences which the book has talked about. The first one is crime. Now, again, you just don't write crime and give a fact related to it. That is something we often do in GS. But in sociology, since they have asked you the social consequences, you would analyze the problem in sociological perspective. What is the sociological understanding of crime? The rate of crime is very high in urban areas in comparison to rural, and tribal. Then you analyze the sociological factors related to it. First, this is something said by Merton, that there is a gap between the ways that you have, the means you have, and what you want to achieve. So, the opportunities of success through socially legitimate means remain scarce as against the number of participants. People want to achieve success, but legitimate means are lacking. So, they resort to crime. There's urban anonymity. You don't know your neighbors who is staying right across you. You don't know anyone. If there's urban anonymity, even if you commit crime today, just vanish to another place, nobody is going to know. That is not suggesting that you must commit crime. You must be very careful and maintain the law and order, right? The traditional agencies of social control and law and order become noticeably weak. For example, earlier, families played a very important role, a traditional role in maintaining law and order. They used to teach you don't, hit anyone, don't steal from anybody, don't do this. These were the traditional agencies of social control. And when you do the changing functions of family, you add this as a point, right? That now we have bureaucratic state to take care of the law and order. Earlier it was family's role. Then the inability of the urban community to integrate. Now this is something which is a part of another social consequence, that is isolation. That in the urban areas you have partial integration. You depend on each other for professional reasons, but not for other things. So crime and city are usually connected to each other because that is the trend. Now sometimes there's a high migration from rural areas, and when there is urbanization of rural areas, that is the people who migrate take the trend of urban areas to rural areas, then the crime in rural areas also increases. Then there is an unprecedented rate of growth of population, widespread economic insecurities, and decline in management. Often when there is a question on social consequences of crime in the urban areas, people forget to write about white-collar crimes. This is something we all are facing. We read about it every day. But still we tend to ignore it. This is a very important point, a very important social consequence, which reflects the morality of the urban areas. The white-collar crime means that you're violating the rules and regulations of trade, business, or profession. Corruption, red tapeism. All these are examples of your white-collar crime, right? But these are, of course, not done by the poor people. This is done by the people who have power, prestige, economic strength, who are able to do this, right? Social isolation. In these cities, there are large heterogeneous population, and this population is living in a very close proximity to one another. The density is high, but socially, they feel relative isolation. This is something, one point we have already discussed, that there is a partial interdependence, that you're only restricted to the economic interdependence and not others. And therefore, you're not sharing the totality of your experiences and social life. And second, the heterogeneity of the population. Heterogeneity of the population means that when you're migrating from rural areas to urban areas or from any other region to urban areas, you see that people coming from diverse backgrounds, class, caste, religion, ethnicity, race, all these are diverse backgrounds. So this creates a partial isolation because integration is reinforced and people maintain social distance. Especially you will see this in terms of caste, right? Also, residential segregation is something which is manifestation of a concept of social isolation or partial isolation in the cities. And the last one is maladjustment. The urban areas, you must understand, are areas of rapid social change. If you remember, when sociology emerged in the late 18th and early 19th century, that was also the period marked by rapid social changes. Similarly, urban areas are marked by rapid social changes, and that creates a new reality every day. And when there is a new reality or new social force, you have an inevitable pressure to conform to that reality. And when you have that pressure, sometimes you may adjust, but sometimes you may fail to do it. And that leads to the problem of maladjustment. This is a problem which is more often witnessed amongst the recent migrants. And this is a study which is done by Robert E. Park, and it was later elaborated by him. And this is the concept of marginal man. Who is a marginal man? A man who is in the process of changing from one culture to another. Some scholars have used this term transitional man also, because here you suffer from the problem of maladjustment because you feel lost amongst the two cultures, whether to follow your traditional culture or you to follow the new culture. So you are in a stage where you're not able to manage the two cultures or the pressures of the two cultures, right? So that leads to internal conflicts, intense anxiety, and social psychological tensions. Now, often when I teach this topic also, I give the example of December 16 rape case. If you have seen the documentary, you know that the man involved in the crime, the people involved in the crime, they suffered from this problem. For them, a woman going in the bus at that time or going out with someone at that time was something which is not acceptable to their culture. And if you see the documentary, that is what they have reflected. I'm never suggesting that this is correct, but that is a problem that people need to address at the psychological level, at the mental level, and bring about an attitudinal change in the society. All these crimes are very closely related to your mindset and how you respond to changes in society. Like, this is not something which is something you would say for very heinous crime. Heinous crimes are act of your mental illness also, or your psychological problem. But for very small changes also, how you feel, for example, depression is the biggest problem in today's modern societies. This is also a problem of maladjustment. So that is how you analyze any question from sociological perspective. Now, this is also the point that I wanted to make. For example, tribal subplan or a question on Manrega and labor codes. Sorry, please do add the conclusion to it. Again, the social consequences of social problems, do add a conclusion to it. Tribal subplan, Manrega, labor codes, all these are GS type questions again, and you have to analyze them from these four things. I already told you, pick up your NCRT and you'll be able to relate it. For example, if there's a question on tribal subplan, you would talk about how this has impacted tribal structures and how this has impacted tribal as a group. If you're talking about Manrega, you would talk about how many different type of social groups are getting employment, whether their social group are more concentrated towards women, SC, ST, and whether that they're able to get any difference in terms of their educational skills. That is how you write a question. आपसे वो ये objectives नहीं पूछे. For example, when I give the question of tribal subplan to write, students often write and mistake writing its objectives. या मनरेगा के objectives. That is not the demand of the question. They don't wish to know the objectives. That is part of GS. Here you need to evaluate on the basis of these 4 things. You can choose any one and evaluate it. These are your GS type questions that you need to address them in this fashion. You will pick up your NCERT. Again, I tell you, please read your NCERTs. These are the most important things, and your syllabus and your previous year questions are your GPS. Your NCERTs are your Bible, and your previous year questions and your syllabus is your GPS to reach your final destination. So I hope this class was helpful. Soon I'll be coming up with the third part of it, and again we will discuss the different framework for previous year questions. And thank you so much for participating in the class. I look forward to another interaction with you. Thank you.